If you're watching The Prepper Historian, you already know that real battlefield advantage rarely comes from what the movies glorify. Guns make noise, swords make legends, but the real survivors, the soldiers who lasted through hellish winters, chaotic retreats, and improvised missions, often depended on something far more ordinary. Before we dive into this forgotten tool, make sure you subscribe to the channel. What you're about to hear is the kind of overlooked history most people never encounter, and it's the type of knowledge that can sharpen both your understanding of the past and your practical skills today. Now, here's the hook. Throughout military history, the soldiers who adapted and improvised survived, and the greatest asset they carried wasn't always a firearm or bayonet. It was an everyday tool, so simple you probably have one lying around your home right now. It rebuilt shelters, freed jammed parts, started fires, cut bindings, opened rations, and even saved lives in combat. Its value didn't come from being powerful. It came from being versatile. And soldiers from the Roman legions to World War II infantrymen treated it like a lifeline. Today we're going into why this tool mattered, how it shaped survival on the battlefield, and why you should never underestimate something so basic. The hidden weapon wasn't exotic at all. It was the soldier's knife. Long before factory rifles, long before standardized gear kits, every culture understood the necessity of a reliable blade. Not a ceremonial dagger, not a decorative sidearm, but a rugged, utilitarian knife meant for constant use. Roman legionaries carried the pugio, but what made it essential wasn't its stabbing capability. It was the daily grind of cutting cordage for tents, preparing food, scraping hides, repairing leather straps, and prying open-sealed containers. Thousands of years later, soldiers in the trenches of World War I carried jackknives for the same reasons. The technology changed, the battlefield changed, but the need didn't. A knife functioned like the universal key to survival. When something needed cutting, shaping, shaving, tightening, prying or fixing, nobody called an armourer. They reached for the same tool that had been on their belt since training. What mattered wasn't elegance. It was reliability, maintenance, and function. The knife kept soldiers alive when supplies broke down. In every war you study, one constant jumps out. Logistics fail long before courage does. A soldier equipped with a simple, sturdy knife could bridge that gap. When rations came sealed in metal tins with no tab to open them, the knife was the solution. When boots tore during a march, a knife cut replacement lacing from leather straps. When early rifles jammed due to fouling, mud, or temperature, a knife point scraped carbon off bolts and parts. One of the most underrated uses was shelter building. Soldiers on the Eastern Front in World War II carved insulation plugs, shaved wood for fire starters, and cut saplings for improvised lean-tos using only their belt knives. The knife turned useless forest debris into life-saving cover. If you're a prepper today, you can apply the same principle. Have one blade dedicated to camp tasks, cutting poles, processing kindling, shaving bark, crafting wedges, and, keep it sharp. This isn't reenactment, it's timeless fieldcraft. The knife became a backup defensive weapon only because it was already in hand. Movies love dramatic knife fights, but real history is blunt. Knives were rarely primary weapons. Soldiers used them defensively only when chaos forced them into close quarters. Trench raiding units in World War I carried specialized blades, but even then their advantage came from speed and stealth, not theatrics. The everyday knife played its part because it was already part of the kit, not because it replaced the rifle. If you're learning historical combat or survival techniques, you really need to understand the hierarchy. The knife is, well, the final fallback, not your first choice. The value is that it's always there, always ready, and honestly, it always functions even when everything else fails. The knife served as a soldier's repair shop, kitchen and workshop, all rolled into one. Just think of how many materials soldiers dealt with every single day: rope, leather, cloth, metal wire, wood, food, wax, grease. The list goes on. One blade handled all of it. In the Second World War, the American M3 trench knife and the simple TL-29 electrician's knife were prized because you could tighten screws, trim wires, shape stakes and cut fuse cords. German troops relied on their Feldmesser for equally mundane but absolutely essential chores. Here's a practical example for modern viewers. If you're out on a multi-day hike and your boot soles start separating, a good knife lets you cut fresh cordage from synthetic straps, punch holes and stitch a temporary repair. If you're fixing gear in camp and need a wedge or a hook, a knife lets you carve it from available wood. Old soldiers, well, they mastered these tricks because their survival really demanded it. Knowing how to maintain the knife mattered as much as owning it. A dull knife is dead weight. Historical soldiers understood sharpening as a routine discipline, not an optional skill. Many carried small whetstones or used improvised abrasives in the field. The sharper the blade, the less energy wasted and the less likely it was to slip and cause injury. For anyone inspired by this history, practice these habits. Clean your blade after each use, especially if cutting anything wet or acidic. Hone it regularly. Oil the pivot if it's a folding knife. Soldiers did this instinctively because in a real survival scenario, a blade is either maintained or useless. The reason this everyday tool deserves the title of hidden weapon is because it empowered self-reliance. A soldier with only a gun depends entirely on supply lines and spare parts. A soldier with a trustworthy knife can improvise, adapt and rebuild from the environment around them. That's why commanders from ancient armies to modern forces never underestimated it. And that's the practical lesson for today's preppers and history-minded survivalists. Your most powerful tool is the one that allows you to solve a wide range of problems under pressure. This is why, even now, experienced outdoorsmen choose a solid fixed-blade knife over any flashy gear. History teaches us that the most successful survivors don't rely on the complex. They rely on the dependable. If you found this guide valuable and want more deep historical insights with real-world utility, make sure you subscribe to The Prepper Historian and share this video with someone who appreciates serious, no-nonsense history.